Boker Tov, good morning. Today is Friday, June 25th, Erev Shabbat, Parshat Balak. Today I get to be in summer casual as we share some words of Torah. Parshat Balak, as we've been following through over the course of the week in our daily dose of Torah, although we really focused in just on the opening verses as we try to unpack and figure out who this man Bilam is, who has been hired to curse the Jews. The parsha is about that unfolding story and what happens as Bilam comes once and again at different locations overlooking over on the mountain to attempt to curse the Israelite people. And each time God overtakes his mouth and he speaks words that God wants to speak, the words of blessing. And eventually, he ends up seemingly expresses words that he just brings out himself without having to be filled by God in some way or another, however to understand exactly that. He never becomes a friend. We should understand that too. And perhaps the most famous of lines in all of all of Bilam's words is this: Ma Tovu Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkenotecha Yisrael. How goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. What is the reference in those verses? And here it breaks down in a few different ways. One is to understand that it refers to somehow he has prophetic vision of the Mishkan, right? The Mishkan of the Jewish people. Mishkan Shiloh, says Rashi, in another interpretation, Uveit Olamim B'Yeshuvan, and the permanent structure of the Beis Hamikdash. He somehow has a prophetic eye about how wonderful that's going to be. So that's one rendering of this verse. Ohalecha, Mishkenotecha are the temporary structure of Shiloh, and the permanent structure, as long as it's there, as long as it stands before destruction. And here we find ourselves on the eve of the 3 weeks. Erev, tonight will be Sunday. We'll be observing the fast of Shivas B'Tammuz when we start to commemorate the destruction of the Beit Olamim, of the Beis Hamikdash. But that's the first rendering. He has some prophetic eye about how wonderful that will be, where we bring our karbanot and live in relationship with God. That's number one. The second is seemingly, as you would imagine, how to read Ohalim. And says Rashi, he looked out, quoting Chazal, he looked out over the encampment of Israel, and he saw the tents. Were they lovely? Were they pretty tents? It was a crowded camp. Divided up into a squadrons, as we know, but still crowded. So what was so good about it? What was so blessed about what they had? And says Rashi, Al shira'a pitchehem she'ein michuvanim zeh mul zeh. He saw how their tents were established so that their entranceways were not facing one another. You can have a crowded camp and everyone is kind of on top of each other and still take privacy seriously enough that you try to set it up that no one's looking into another person's tent. I remember years ago, there was a restaurant called Levana. It had two different iterations. I remember the earlier iteration of Levana. It was a little teeny cramped structure. It's a very small place. And they wanted to have, people sitting in restaurants in the restaurant and having good experience, but how many people can you get into a small place? And they worked out, they actually won awards for this by the use of dim lighting. They worked it out that every table was set up in such a way that you really couldn't look at the other person because the light came pretty much just down straight on your tabletop, and there wasn't a larger ambient light in the room. I found it to be really weird to eat because basically you eat where you can see the food because you put your fork into the food and the light is on that, and you can't really follow it up to your mouth because the light didn't go onto it didn't follow the fork all the way up. But it was an attempt to create some sense of private experience, even though you were in a crowded space. And that's what I think about sometimes when I reflect on this Rashi. And so, on the one hand, what he's praising is the individuality and the protection of people's privacy. But I would suggest that in the very same moment that's what we are praising about the Am Yisrael, there is a larger sense of the larger encampment of Israel, where people are absolutely looking out for one another. Right? People look out for one another, even though they're not looking into one another's homes, and that's what a community is, where we talk about our collective, and the collective is really important, and at the same time we try to respect the individuality and individual lives of every person. That's a healthy community setup. That's reflection number 2. First is that he has a prophetic vision of specifically the Mishkan and specifically the Beis Hamikdash, and then sort of this taking in of what he sees as a value system in the encampment of Israel, where people are respecting one another, even though they're all part of a collective. And then there is the other rendering, which suggests that we're talking about Batei Midrashot, Batei Kinesiot. We're talking about the places where, that's the Midrash, Lekach Tov, Elu Batei Midrashot, Mishkanotecha Yisrael, Elu Batei Kinesiot. It refers to houses of study and the house and the place where Jews gather of prayer that Jews have. So which one is it? What is being reflected there? Is it really just an extension, which is the simplest read, an extension of the first value? He sees the Mishkan, the tabernacle, he sees the Beit HaMikdash, and now we say, well, he actually sees the later permutations of that in your houses of study and houses of prayer, where worship continues to happen. Or is it that somehow can we combine the other value too? He looks out at the beauty of of the values which are lived there in the collective of Israel, the way in which people, on the one hand, together and at the same time respectful of the individual lives that every person has. That's what our community does. Of course, we don't have right now. We can drive by the building and say with a prophetic eye, oh, how beautiful are your tents, and how beautiful will your dwelling place because we see it in Hanukkah time. Right now we see just the structure under its renovation and its construction. But is it also the recognition about what a community is more broadly, and those values that perhaps are reflected in the tents of Jacob, in the family lives that we describe? We know we're living them right now. We're in people's backyards, and where our Ohalim and our Mishkanot are taking place in people's backyards. And we're feeling that sense of connection, even as I think we continue to respect what everybody is about, what every individual is about, and affirm it and value it. Those are essential core values of our community, the collective and the individual, and hoping and striving that every individual can find their place in the collective, and hopefully even in their individual lives, which happen in private, to continue to carry on those values that indeed are reflective of our community as a whole. Wishing you a Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Enjoy your Ohalim and enjoy the minyan in the back of someone's Ohel and as well. Shabbat Shalom.